For hundreds of years, Ireland had suffered under heavy persecution by the English Protestants. Even though Ireland was technically the king's third realm, it was never treated as such. The island was really England's first colony, and yet it was treated worse than any colony England would establish afterwards. The Irish fought several rebellions before independence. Every time they always advocated for a republic. Since the English and later British monarchy was really the only one they ever knew, this basically soured their entire view on the institution itself. But what if I told you there was a chance before the Easter Rising, before even the rebellion of 1798, there was a chance for Ireland to break away with an independent Catholic monarchy? Let me tell you the story of the first Jacobite rising. It all started in 1685 when James II, a Catholic, had ascended the throne, much to the chagrin of pretty much everyone in England. But they tolerated him as he had no legitimate sons and his two Protestant daughters were next in line for the throne. Next thing you know, 3 years later he sires a legitimate son, who would be raised Catholic. By this point, Parliament was pretty much done with him, so they kicked him out and invited a Dutch prince to invade in what later became known as the Glorious Revolution. In March of 1689, the deposed King James II had sailed to Ireland with the help of the French to mount a rebellion in order to take the thrones of the three kingdoms back from his daughter Mary and his son-in-law William. James had the support of Ireland's Lord Deputy Richard Tyrconnell, and he promised religious freedom to anyone who joined his cause. Though he was initially successful, his efforts would be slowed down when Williamite troops entered Ulster. Then King William himself came to Ireland to deal with the problem himself. He'd wanted to deal with the rebellion in Ireland quickly so he could get his troops to the continent for the ongoing 9 Years' War. Not wanting to give up Dublin so easily, James would have his army hold the line at the Boyne River. In July of 1690, Williamite troops led by William of Orange would meet King James and his Jacobite forces outside of Drogheda. The battle was a close one. It started out with William sending an auxiliary force under the Duke of Schomberg to cross the river at Slane in order to flank the Jacobite positions. He instead crossed the river at Rosnaree, defeating the small Jacobite garrison that was stationed there, and began lining up into formation. In our timeline, James spotted this force and mistook it for the entire Williamite army, sending 2/3 of his army to go fight them. This was his crucial mistake. The Williamites would end up crossing the river and James would retreat back to Dublin, destroying Jacobite morale as he would eventually flee Ireland back to France. The Jacobites would later be fully defeated at the Battle of Aughrim a year later, dooming the Jacobite cause to failure. But what if this didn't happen? In this timeline, James calls Schomberg's bluff and keeps most of his army near the position at Oldbridge, still sending an auxiliary force to deal with him. Also, he would have to make some different calls too. He would crucially keep his artillery in the area, not giving the artillery advantage to the Williamites. Tyrconnell motivates King James to confront the Williamite troops himself. The Jacobite cavalry attacked the Williamites' right flank just as they were crossing the river. Since it was foggy, the Williamite troops were caught off guard and suffered a rout, and their whole line was rolled up. In the midst of battle, King James raised the green harp flag as a standard in order to boost Jacobite morale. Once they were routed, most Williamite troops began to flee the battle, and William was forced to call a general retreat. Despite their smaller numbers, the Jacobites were able to inflict heavy damage, as William was forced to retreat to Belfast. The Jacobites would end up capturing Dundalk, and continue pushing the Williamites up to Newry. The Jacobites had won the Battle of the Boyne, and James II is able to consolidate his power and establish a foothold in Ireland. Obviously, William wouldn't want to just allow the Stuarts to sit in Dublin, but since he failed to end the conflict quickly, he had to get back to London so he could send his troops to the continent since the 9 Years' War was still ongoing. This would give the Jacobites breathing room to fortify their position and build up a stronghold in Ireland. They would continue to receive aid from the French in the coming years, and would build up into a close alliance. Although the Kingdom of Ireland is now its own separate country, this doesn't really change the outcome in the 9 Years' War, as France still loses. and William and Mary's power base remains entrenched in Great Britain. This causes James to realize that if he wants to take back all of the Isles, he'll have to settle for slow but steady gains while holding his ground in Ireland, which is much easier with the Catholic population, who are much more keen to have a monarch that shares their faith. Although the English hated James for being a Catholic, this was perfect for the Irish, as they had suffered for years under heavy persecution by the Protestant English. Since the war had ended, William and Mary had planned to kick James out of Dublin for good, but since the Jacobites were now fortified enough to hold them off, they were unable to retaliate for the time being. This would result in a sort of Cold War dynamic. Similar to our timeline, Ulster would be a serious point of contention here, with the English and Irish getting into frequent spats over it. Upon his death in 1701, James II would be succeeded by his young son James III. King William would die a year later, and he would be succeeded by Queen Anne, James's older sister. She would sign the Acts of Union in 1707, dissolving the Scottish Parliament and absorbing Scotland into the newly created United Kingdom. With this, the Jacobite movement would solidify its aims, the breakup of the Union of Crowns, and a Stuart restoration to each kingdom.